Hello and welcome to the Two Trees. We're here to talk about angels and demons, ghosts, the pagan gods, and the weird corners of the Bible. We're talking about the beliefs of the ancient world, the way that they talked about the supernatural world, all to help you understand the people of the Bible and its context. We're hoping to help you engage in a deeper level with the text of Scripture, but more important than all of the things that we're trying to do here at our podcast is we want to glorify Jesus. We want to show him to you as Deuteronomy 10:17 describes him. The Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, mighty and awesome. If you're enjoying the Two Trees, why don't you think about sharing our podcast with some of your friends, maybe post it on social media. If we're going to grow, it will only grow because you guys decided that it would. And we appreciate all the love and the support that we've got from you guys so far, and we're just having fun doing what we do. But I'm here with Martin Listener.
Hey all.
And who are you?
Yes, the Jacob Kessling in the house.
Jacob Kessling.
I love
That's
how
right.
Jacob's introductions get worse and worse every time.
I know.
John at least used to say your name. Now it's just.
You know,
I'm not going to say the same thing. I don't want to be predictable. I like to just throw out some. I mean, I actually think about just shouting during the intro music just to throw something.
You know,
just
we're
to
all
spice things
mildly
up a little bit.
surprised that you don't. Like, you just
I know.
I mean,
burst
realistically,
into song. He's always dancing over there. He's doing like
I
the
know.
shimmy.
Let's take it too long. Let's get in this thing. Woo!
he actually has. We just cut it out all the time. So
Oh my word. Well, that's true. That's true.
we
well,
need to release the blooper reel.
We
one of these
don't
times.
really do edits unless it happens right at the beginning, and we're like, that's it.
I'm deeply
We're starting over.
I came up with. I have a really awesome intro to our ramblings, and yet we still have not used them. So we just need to get back to it. I like it.
I like it too. It's the technology factor of trying to figure out how to move it from there to there into the board and make
that's
that
true.
happen.
If it takes more than 3 clicks, we are lost.
Yeah, I watched a video. I need to go back and rewatch the video. It was like a stupid friendly guide on how to do that.
Hey, I got a weird question before we get in today, and this is one of those, like, I don't know if it's a pet peeve or whatever the case is, but you know there are often
Why don't you share your feelings?
I know I just feel very, very angry right now. I'm not angry. I don't get angry too easily. But one of the things that aggravates me, or gets me frustrated, or makes me say
got it.
something under our breath, is when people will use verses like way out of context. And it's just and all the time. Just all the time. Anyway, but at the same time, I'm like, well, they've heard this all their life. They perhaps haven't read the context, and so they just kind of use it. So my question is, have you guys ever noticed it? And what if so, what passage, what verse, what did they use out of context?
Oh man,
Because the one I hear a lot is like you get into prayer time or something, and we have a group of people. It's like where 2 or more are gathered. It's like the idea of this is I'm going to teach you that there needs to be a gaggle of people together. Then he's with us.
I think the appropriate word for a group of Christians is gaggle.
Yes, I do. Well, it's the Hebrew word, I think. Well, I mean, but the hard
You're the
part
most
is
educated man at the table.
This
It's
is
like
great.
when you say things, I'm like writing it down over here. Wait a minute.
Wouldn't it just be a herd or if we're sheep, right?
I like gaggle.
Shepherd.
Yeah, but I think Jesus may have been being kind with the whole sheep thing. Like,
We should be geese.
we're
'Cause
more
that would
like
be a
geese.
gaggle,
Like,
right?
yeah, well, they're mean. Sheep are nice and
Yeah.
uh,
Geese are very mean.
geese are mean, and
I
that's
found
been
that
more
out
of
on the
my
golf
church
course.
experience. I think with most places.
It's not a bad thought.
Not Stillwater. You guys are great.
Hey, you guys are not answering my question because I have others.
Oh yeah. So the biggest one for me has always been the old paths. Go back to the
Oh.
old paths, which pretty much, as far as I can tell, means whatever era of the past you overly romanticize in your head. That's what the old paths mean.
Is there a verse that says old path?
Yeah,
somewhere?
it's in there, but it doesn't mean like. I always heard it like the goal is Mayberry.
Well, how
And if we
far?
can
How
just
old do we got to
back
get? How
that-
far back do we go?
Not
to be
not
old?
very old. You really just need to hit like 1950, and that's what the prophets
Okay.
were talking about, apparently.
Man, serious. This is great. Well, I mean, another one that I'm sorry because I know this often gets on people's bathroom walls or a cross stitch somewhere, but like,
Live, laugh, love. It says it in there.
no, it's like, well, I'm not saying that this can't ever. I don't know. Maybe I am. I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. I mean, it's like
That is weird bathroom art.
it
Like-
is, but like I'm not saying that there's that God doesn't have a plan. I just sometimes feel like that passage is used out of context, and I try to be gracious and just back out. But sometimes I'm like, anyway. I just was thinking about that because it often just aggravates me, and maybe I have problems. Maybe I need to be prayed for.
I think that's probably true, and definitely for me too. And I when people bust out the old Pat's verse, I always just smile because I know what their heart is trying to tell me. It's just I would like a little bit of Bible study occasionally.
The funny thing about that is, if you look at it the way I would look at it, like from a sports way or a numbers way, is Bible verses can be cherry-picked for both sides.
Yeah.
They always say that stats play on both teams, so you can take the same stat and read it a certain way, which means it's good for this team, or read it another way and it's good for the opposing team.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the same way when we cherry-pick the verses. You can
I feel like there's
a
a joke about like Calvinists and Armenians in there somewhere.
Probably. I'll think of it later.
Well, so if you guys have any verses or phrases that's often used out of context, throw them on our Facebook. We'd love to hear them and laugh. Let's just laugh. Listen, this isn't about debate and fight and, how dare you take this from me or whatever. Let's just have some fun with it. And then for you, if that is a verse you use, let's look up the context and see if it's just something we can grab that way.
I like it. Yeah, let's see what they've got. Yeah,
we'll
post a couple of your favorite ones out there and see what you've got. Martin, is there one that jumps to you?
None that come right up the top of my head, to be honest with you. But like I mentioned, it is fun to listen to somebody say a verse one way and then later on use that same verse to go against what they said before. And so it's like, if you just understand what they were actually talking about, then you wouldn't have that flip-flop action going on. So, I'll have to think of one. I'll get back with you. I'll post it on the Facebook page.
I have one on the tip of my tongue, but I'll post some
you
later.
drove out to Indiana today, right? So is this what you were thinking about the whole way?
Well, I was actually listening to a podcast, some podcast today. I was listening to Bema.
Yeah, I like Bema.
It's some really challenging stuff. It really is. And I really feel like I drift more towards the Eastern mindset, the question, answer, discovery thing, instead of like trying to find lists of facts and alliteration. I mean, though I see the value in that stuff, and I think both sides bring something that, if they work together, bring something really beautiful when it comes to understanding Scripture. But because I've grown up in the Western culture, I really am embracing this idea of this Eastern culture, this idea of asking questions and seeking God together, and pictures versus terms.
Well, I think that was a big deal for me, was just when I realized I was supposed to be having questions. I spent a long time trying to pretend like I knew what we were talking about, like in church, and they'd bring up names and places, and I put a lot of effort into trying to know like the answers to things, and it got to the point where I wasn't reading the Bible with questions in mind. I was reading it with answers in mind.
Right.
And it stunted my growth because I wasn't exploring anymore. I just was kind of looking back down the hallway.
So you was in literature quite a bit, and teaching literature for high school students. Like this idea of, I think it's called a chiasm. Like I'm really struggling, kind of leaning in on that that side of things. And they'll call them like hidden treasures and stuff of like the bookends. I've had to listen to these episodes like a couple times to try to grasp what they're saying. I don't think that way, and I think this is an interesting way to approach Scripture. But I feel like some of it is necessary to, in some cases, it's necessary to listen to Hebrew language too, because there seems to be some play on words.
Yeah, and it's one of the cool things about living now is we have the ability with the click of a button to listen to, some of the best scholars that are out there, and they're taking their time to explain this stuff for me. I don't have to travel to Portland or something to hear the Bible Project guys or anything like. They're in my car. Yeah, it's just a matter of, do you have an interest, and that's kind of what we're hoping to add to the conversation of, is just these are things that we in our community are chatting about and talking about, and things that we're noticing, and not to toot our own horn. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying it's fun.
It really is.
We're not doing this for any other reason than that. Like, we enjoy the Bible and talking about it together.
Well, and realistically, when you go on that Eastern-Western type of idea, I think that I've really been blessed with somebody at work that thinks that way. He'll just be walking by and like blurt out a question to me about a scripture that he's been reading and trying to think through, and it's something that seems like almost like you're questioning the Bible or you're questioning God, but it's like you're just trying to discover it more and understand it more. And that doesn't work with everybody that you try to have conversation with. if you're around with a group of people and you ask a question that seems contradictory to their answer, that can be kind of inflammatory with some people. So it's a different way of thinking, and I think when you approach it with the idea of you're not trying to be right or prove them wrong, that it's a way that you can really grow and develop with the Scripture. So it's a cool way of thinking, but it's not what people are used to.
It really does help you get grounded in what you believe when you are confronted with it, with other questions, and having a safe place for a group of people to go back into Scripture, and it's okay to ask the dumb question or the hard question or the what people say is heretical question, to ask it.
Yeah.
And without being like stamped with with a big H on your shirt, like you're a heretic. But man, it's cool to get in there and just really just dig in. And what do we do with these texts that don't seem to go along with it? But
I think that's one of the reasons that Jesus likes community. Like the idea of I do a Bible study on Tuesdays, and right now we're reading through the book of Exodus together. And like I've studied it, I've got my thoughts and things put together, but it never actually follows the outline when we're there, because there are so many people from really interesting backgrounds and their life experiences they highlight different things in the text that they look at and they think, wow, what about this? Is this a question that I should be having? And it's always more fun to do it that way, because you're getting like a 3D view of something when you're seeing it through alternate eyes and perspectives.
When you have you're wired a little differently, John, in the sense that I feel like you a lot of times like to have the answers. When you get asked questions that like you just have no clue, or this is something like totally outside the box new to you, does that make you uncomfortable?
No, it makes me excited.
Okay.
I'm like, let's go, man.
Now I have something else to dig in on.
I'm like, I tell my wife, listen, honey, I have to buy these books.
I remember one time I said something around the table, and I think you were probably up till like 3 a.m. researching it. Like, I gotta find the answers. I love that about your learning aspect and your strength.
That's my main goal of being on this podcast, is to give John a question where he has to do that. So
it happens to me all the time.
That's what I'm here for.
I'll come back to you on this one.
I don't know, but I'm
music to my
super
ears.
intrigued.
I feel like sometimes though you just make up answers with confidence. We're like, oh, okay, that sounds good.
I would not do that to you.
And then he secretly goes back and researches
And then hope that I was right.
Right, please. I think I remember.
I think
one book I read
on Jeopardy, I saw this.
Oh, my word.
Anyway, we are continuing our chat about territorial spirits. And the story we're going to look at today is in the book of Judges. And we're going to look at Gideon, right? The guy who invented leaving Bibles in hotel rooms. That was his major contribution.
We really appreciate him.
Yes.
He's been doing it for centuries.
Yeah. So the bad guy in the Gideon story, depending on who you ask, but the main bad guy is a group of people called Midian, or the Midianites. And the Midianites are a people that go hand in hand with the story of the Jewish people. They're actually cousins of the Jewish people. Abraham had a firstborn son named Ishmael, and then his next son's name was Isaac. And after after Isaac and Ishmael grew up, there were other sons born to Abraham. He had another wife after Sarah. Her name was Keturah. And she has a son by Abraham, and his name is Midian. Now, he doesn't grow up there with Isaac and Ishmael and those guys, but he is part of that Abrahamic world. He would have been taught these things. His heritage should have been that paralleled the Jewish people in their relationship with God. And instead, Midian and his people definitely veer off into the pagan world. And they become really just another one of the Goyim, another one of the Gentile peoples. And they pop up in the Bible pretty often, and almost always in a negative way. There are some positive things about the Midianites, and we'll get to those. But places where you might be familiar with them, when Joseph is sold into slavery. Remember that story? Like, he's down in the pit. And it's the Midianites who they sell him to. They were into slavery.
Moses' wife, they're from that area too?
Oh, yeah. It's Moses marries a girl named Zipporah, and her father-in-law is the priest of Midian. And so there is a very real sense in which the stories reconnect there.
Yeah.
But Midian seems to have been more than just a people group. The Bible sometimes talks about it as though it's the people who live in the land that they associated with Midian. And so sometimes it will use different phrases or different examples of this, but it's typically around the area where the Moabites are living, the mountains of Moab there across the Dead Sea. And that place is in opposition to the Exodus. They don't want Israel coming back into the land. They don't like the idea of God's plan coming even further into fruition. And in the book of Numbers 22, we get a story about how the leaders of Moab and the leaders of Midian try to stop Israel from coming. They get together a little earlier in the story, and they have a guy called Balaam. You remember Balaam? Yeah, he comes, and he's supposed to curse them, and he blesses them instead, and they're really upset about this.
This is donkey talk.
Donkey talking,
story.
yeah, and then the next part after that, after the plot to get Balaam's curse to destroy the Israelites, they come up with another plan, and here it's really the rulers of Moab who are the pushers behind this, but the Midianites are included by example. And so what happens in Numbers 25 is that they attempt to have the Israelites abandon their God and worship the gods of the Midianites and the Moabites. In particular, it's a god called Baal Peor. And we've talked a little bit about Baal, but I want to take just a minute and look at this. This is Numbers.
Is this Baal's brother?
No, it's an aspect of Baal. Certain places were celebrations of aspects of the god. Like, for instance, Mount Carmel was like a garden of orchards, and it was about rain and fertility. In the Dead Sea, I mean, you saw it, Jacob. I mean, over there, like, you're not going to be celebrating rainfall and fertility in the area around the Dead Sea.
No, you're not. Well, I mean, what was the area that had that river that sprung out of the rock?
Oh, En-Gedi?
Yeah, En-Gedi.
Mm-hmm.
That was about the only area that was any such green or whatever.
Did you associate that, though, with, like, rain clouds?
No, not at all.
It's like rock springs and things.
Yeah.
Remember, Baal is the god who rains, who brings the waters
That's
from
right.
above.
Yep.
And so if you are getting water in the Dead Sea area, it's springing up out of the earth from the underworld. And so that part of the world really focused in on Baal in their worship of him, but not in the positive rainfall element. They were really into the underworld connection of the god Baal. And so, Jacob, I've saved this verse for you because it has a present there for you in Numbers 25,
Hopefully
verses
it's one
1
of my
through
favorite,
3.
Yes, my favorite
so
city.
If you'll read that for me, we'll talk about it.
All right. Numbers 25, 1 through 3. Part of their plan after Balaam's failure was to try to defile Israel and enslave them to their God. While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel.
And really the result of this is there's 24,000 people who die from a plague. God is furious with them. They almost derail the entire Exodus expedition. And Jacob smiles every time we see the word Shittim or Shittim over here, and he just giggles like a small child.
I do. I think I read it like the wrong way the first time I was at church.
So every time I see this now, I hear you laughing in the back of my head.
That's terrible. I did it on purpose, hoping that someone from this podcast would try to correct me on Facebook, but no one has.
That's okay. But I want you to kind of take a look at that, guys. What do you notice in that verse? Like, what jumps out to you when you're reading it?
Well, I mean, of course, the obvious like teenage thing that sticks out is that the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab.
Yeah, what does that mean?
I'm assuming they were leaving their wives and those type of things and taking on sexual relations with the Moab people when I think God's asked them to kind of be separate from them.
Yeah, to us in our culture, and our culture is obsessed with sex.
Yeah.
It is the driving impulse of our society and even our curse words. You know, that's like the ultimate swear.
This is taking on their gods.
It
not
is. Yeah,
necessarily.
it isn't just the unfaithfulness to the
It
spouse.
is taking on the worship of these.
But remember that in the Bible, marriage is a picture of our relationship with God. And so in this text, when it says they began to whore with the daughters of Moab, this is a phrase that's used a lot in the prophets. It says Israel whored after other gods. And what it says there in verse 2 is that these invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods.
Were these prophetesses of Moab? Was this kind of like what's happening with the temple Diana and those kind of things in Corinth and
Absolutely
Ephesus? Interesting.
And so what you have here is Israel is on its way. It's in a relationship with God, and it hits this place, Baal Peor, and all of a sudden, what Balaam couldn't do, they do themselves. Balaam was supposed to curse them, and he couldn't curse them, but now Israel has brought a curse on itself, and the reason for the curse, and 24,000 people dying, is because of their unfaithfulness to God. And what I'm going to suggest here is that this is about more than just sexual immorality. If that was all that it would still be absolutely evil and abomination.
So when we go to the beginning of Judges, like this, the context of this is God has asked them to drive or wipe out these individuals, and they don't do it, and they mingle with them. And I think the reason that's taking place is because this kind of thing is what happens. They often become and take on their gods, their practices, their worship. I don't understand why can't it be effective the other way? I think isn't that what God intended? That Israel would be so blessed and they would be such a blessing that everyone in the world would want to be part of Israel. And it seems like the opposite is taking place. And I often wonder why, at the same time, it's what we wrestle with today. But you look at this and I'm like, man, Israel should have been the attractive one and the nation should have wanted to been part of Israel. But it's just the opposite that's taking place. And these cycles of sin and Judges, it's just kind of messed up. But they didn't drive out. The idea of this is what I was trying to start this with. They're hanging out with these individuals, and it seems like at the very beginning of Judges, you say that they didn't drive them out, whatever the case is. And then Joshua's lineage dies. They didn't pass on the stories of God and who he was, and they just all started to fall
and
apart.
that story comes back to haunt them. It doesn't disappear. But it's the same story, the whole Phinehas episode that happens, and it's a really dramatic story. But it isn't just about immorality. There are lots of places in the world that are immoral. That's the truth.
Yeah.
And that's a sin against God. But what was happening here wasn't just immorality; it was also spiritual bondage to this false god. On the very edge of success. They've left Egypt. God has delivered them. They spent a whole year at Mount Sinai. They have no doubt that God is real. So why would they turn to follow this pretender?
That's what I would know. And I think it's because there was something there. I mean, we talked last episode about these gods have power. They're producing something. Something was attractive about it, and they were drawn to it.
I think it's also partly because the God seems to have been saying what they wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like Satan did
the
to
propaganda
Eve.
that we talked about.
Yeah, it was like, hey, my religion involves doing, all these things. And apparently the Israelite men were very interested in that.
But it's so interesting to me because the first thought that Jacob said was the same thing that I would have thought was, that they were being immoral or they were going against their marriages and getting it on with each other. But it almost seems like, and this is a common thought process, I guess, in people that I talk to, is that, when you do something really bad, that's worse of a sin or not. There's levels to the sin and whatnot. But when you're looking about them whoring around to the daughters of Moab, it's more about them being unfaithful to their God than it is in their physical sense. So here we are first thinking about how they're being, unfaithful in their flesh, but realistically it's a spiritual unfaithfulness that hurts them more than that. So there's got to be something in there about how God views the spiritual unfaithfulness as more important than the physical unfaithfulness. We fall to our flesh all the time, and God will, help with that. But when we're unfaithful to Him, there's little that can be done that can save from that other than His grace for that. So it's like there's got to be something to that somehow we first think of the physical portion of this, And realistically, that's missing the boat, I think, in my eyes. God's saying it's not because they were just doing all this bad stuff. Think of the Noah story. When we talk about how bad it was in Noah's time that God had to do something because this, that, and the other, it was because they were whoring around on God. They were the sons of men were going, or the sons of God were going against God. It wasn't because the people were saying bad curse words that we don't say anymore and all this, that, and the other. It was the spiritual unfaithfulness to God that caused that event to happen.
Yeah, and they go together. As soon as you've abandoned the command and the word of God, then you substitute your own ideas of what's right and wrong, and that's the idea of the two trees.
It is interesting what he's saying too.
Like,
not necessarily sin. I was going back to that Joshua passage, and it doesn't say like they all started to sin and steal and lie to each other. It says after the whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up. This is Judges chapter 2, who neither knew the Lord or what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord of their ancestors, who had brought them up out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them, and they aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtaroths.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so what I'm trying to say builds off of both of these things. In the Garden of Eden, you have the two trees. And you have the tree that leads to life, that is a representation of our relationship with God. Now, I do think it was a real tree, but it's also a representation.
Yeah.
You have this other tree where mankind can be like the gods by defining right and wrong for themselves. Once you abandon the tree of life, you begin to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right.
I'll define what's right and wrong. I'll seek power, and I'll seek these things myself. And there's a very real sense in which this was happening, even at the very gates of the tabernacle itself, if you read this story. But this is where we're introduced to Baal of Peor. And it's part of the Baal story that celebrates the end of it.
And John, I got to just pop this in because when you mentioned being like the gods by defining what is right and wrong, it just really hit me and resonated. We're almost 40 episodes in, and now it's just finally hitting me. So
Hooray.
Don't worry about
this
it, guys.
Is working.
If you're getting there. But to be honest, like people say to be like the gods, well, I'm going to get these special powers and be able to fly and go through walls or whatever. But think of the ultimate power that you could possess is defining what is right and what is wrong. If whatever you want to do, you can now say that is the right way that the world operates, that's the ultimate power. Because you can say, well, it's right for you to bring me gifts and bring me money. And if you don't, you're wrong. And so that's the ultimate power. It's not that like we're going to have these special abilities and whatnot, but we could say like, well, I think it's okay to lie, cheat and steal and all this, that, and the other, but only when I do it, right? Nobody else can do it, and that's what's right and that's what's wrong. And it goes against the natural order of how the world works because that's the way God put it in place. And so that's the power, I think, that you're being like the gods is because you control what everybody thinks is right and wrong. I don't know why that just stuck out to me.
Well, and it makes me think also, going back to a conversation we had with some of our friends the other day, but you think that's the appeal of like legalism?
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know. I keep thinking about this particular story, not just with the legalistic side of things, but connecting it back to the two trees. Here's God saying, I am your God, and yet, and is wanting to bless them and give them, and yet here they are deciding to eat from this again, a broken cistern that will hold no water. It is passing pleasure of sin, like Moses puts it, but like they're deciding to take on whatever this other Baal of Peor or the prophetesses of them or whatever is taking on instead of eating from this tree of life. And again, this is a pattern. I think it's why the two trees idea.
Right,
This is a pattern all through the Bible.
And the Bible's going to clue us into that. We meet Gideon under a tree. Like that element is retained in this story. Just a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with the story of Baal. It's not in the Bible. We know about Baal that he was a bad guy, but we actually know Baal's writings. There were all kinds of them, and we have dug up lots of things about Baal. And part of his story involves him overthrowing the monsters of the sea, the chaos monsters. But at the very end of his story, he is captured by the underworld god, the god of death named Mot, which I think is how you pronounce that. It's kind of like an I am Groot kind of a thing. I don't know how to say it. I'm assuming that's how it is. And Baal is pulled out of the sky and he disappears down into the underworld until the spring or the winter, I guess, when it starts raining again, and then he would be back in the heavens. And it was a way that they used to explain the comings and goings of the season. But on Mount Carmel, where Elijah was, they were focused in on the rain, the coming of the waters. In the Dead Sea, they were focused in on the death, the underworld. And during Baal's annual vacation in the underworld, when he's stuck down there every year, he's hanging with his buddies down there, they would literally dig graves or pits into the ground, and they would pour offerings down into these fake graves or these crevices in the rock or down into caverns and that kind of a thing. And when we were in the Dead Sea, we saw a lot of caves and things. They're all over the place. And Peor literally means to open wide, as in a mouth that's gaping out of the earth. And this is an idea, the idea of the mouth of hell. In the north, you have a place called Caesarea Philippi, where they believed this was happening. The Canaanites also seem to have thought that there was a place in the wilderness where this was happening. It
looks like a mouth, though. It does look like a mouth with some gnarly teeth. It's a really weird looking place.
Caesarea Philippi. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's I liked it, but it was also it was creepy. But I want to show you a place in the Bible where the Bible does this same mouth analogy, and it's in Ephesians 5, or not in Ephesians. It's in Isaiah 5:14.
Therefore, Sheol has enlarged its appetite and opened its mouth beyond measure, and the nobility of Jerusalem and her multitude will go down. Her revelers and he who exalts in her offering would be made.
No, that's my stuff there. That's my notes.
Sorry.
Yeah. So literally, what you've got here is the Bible saying, hell, the mouth of hell is open, and that doesn't mean that there's literally like a Grim Reaper and he's got just like giant mouth and he like eats up souls. This is a way of talking about death, of entering into the grave, that the underworld eats you.
Yeah, and open mouth for me makes me think about that the appetite is not yet satisfied. I want more.
Oh yeah,
more lives to come in. I'm gonna keep my mouth open. It's, you know what I'm saying? I just, it makes it a little bit a little darker.
It is
right?
dark, and that's the kind of worship that was happening at Baal Peor. Offerings were being made to the underworld spirits, and they were hosting these like gigantic drinking parties filled with sex magic, and they were hoping that it would help Baal return to the skies. And that's really what's going on here. They're sacrificing things and pouring the blood and the wine down into graves. They're engaging in sex magic, and they're getting plastered drunk, just trying to make life exciting again in the hopes of wooing Baal up out of the ground. And the Bible is going to talk to us a little bit about this. In the book of Psalms 106, verses 28 and 29, we get a glimpse that the book of Numbers doesn't give us. This is information that they knew from their culture, but we don't know because we're not as familiar with Baal of Peor. And so if you'll look at Psalm 106, it will give you an additional detail.
Starting in verse 28, then they yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor.
And that part we know. So the Baal of the gaping mouth of hell, right? And what did they do?
And they ate sacrifices offered to the dead. They provoked the Lord to anger with their deeds.
Now, if you read this account in Numbers, you're not going to see where they're eating offerings offered to the dead. You're going to see where they're at great dinners and feasts, and there's wine, and there's lots of drinking, and there's lots of sex happening. But what's happening here is actually pagan worship. It wasn't just a frat party. This is all infused with territorial spiritual connections. That this is the god of Baal. This is the god of the Midianites. And so in the Gideon story, when the people are running from Midian, they would have seen this as a clash of interests. Is the Lord capable of delivering his people from the hands of Baal, from the hands of the Midianites. And so when you jump into Judges 6, you're going to get this really awesome encounter with God, and then this really interesting attack against Baal. And I think you have to read them that way, not just as two separate incidents, but really of two parts of the same coin. Where God goes, the territorial spirits flee. Where he is loved and honored, there is no room for them. And so we're going to start reading in Judges 6 and in verse 11.
Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah?
Yeah.
Oprah?
Just say Oprah, it makes it good.
Oprah, yeah. Well, we'll stop there. So who is this?
The angel of the Lord.
Jesus.
Yeah, this is the angel of the Lord. And that literally means the messenger of the Lord. And he's come and he's doing what?
Meeting under a tree.
Sitting under a tree.
Have we seen another time where angels came and sat beneath a tree?
Abraham.
Yeah, this story should ring in the back of your mind. Oh, a terebinth tree. That's an oak tree, I think. That's one of those moments where my brain is leaking facts. I'm pretty confident it's an oak tree. It's a great big oak tree. And the angel of the Lord comes, and he's just sitting under this tree. Now, that is not a very heroic posture. Israel is in danger. The Midianites are riding up and down. And where is the Lord?
Just hanging out in a hammock.
He's at ease under the tree. This has very real Edenic connections.
Yeah.
Once again, we're finding an introduction to God beneath the boughs of a tree. Now, does that mean that like trees are portals to heaven? It doesn't mean that. Instead, this is a way of projecting an idea that the Lord is the God of the garden. And so while everyone is running around and they're out of control, they don't know what's going on, the Lord has not lost control at all. He's at ease beneath his tree. He's sitting down, and he's talking to Joash, or the tree that belonged to Joash, the Abezerite, while his son Gideon was beating out the wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. Now, here's a contrast of images. Where is the Lord?
Under the tree.
Under the tree.
He's sitting down
In the shade.
in the shade, enjoying his ease.
Some grapes.
And he looks over the edge, and down in this hole
Hiding.
is Gideon.
Sweating and working.
And he's threshing wheat. He's throwing it up in the air, and the chaff would take it away. But he's hiding down in a hole. And this is great. The angel of the Lord appeared to him, and pick it up there.
The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor."
We're going to stop there. Is that a greeting or is that a fact?
I think he's speaking into him what he sees in him, or what he is, or what he will become.
Ooh.
I think that's what I say. It doesn't seem that's who he is currently.
Do you remember earlier when we said that if we sit and we read in community, someone will point out something that is just from a completely different direction?
Yeah.
This is one of those moments, because my mind went to the beginning of that phrase, "The Lord is with you." And your mind went to the end of that phrase that says, "Mighty man of valor."
Yeah.
And so we're both looking at the exact same thing
Seeing something
and
different.
highlighting a different portion. And so maybe you're out there listening to us and that kind of thing happens to you. I just wanted to point it out. So yeah, this is literally the Lord. And he calls him a mighty man of valor, which is, you said, why do you say that this is what's going to be seen? Why do you not think he's a mighty man of valor?
Because of what you're going to read in the text here coming up. But so let me ask you this question. I guess I always pictured when the angel of the Lord appears, you see times when people fall on their faces and all this other stuff. Did he need to introduce himself? I mean, did he look like an ordinary man where he had to say, "Hey, the Lord is with you. I am the Lord," or whatever. Like, I didn't know. I mean, or was he busy doing this wheat thing and he wasn't even looking? These are the questions that I have, because it seems like in other places in the Bible, when this angel of the Lord shows up, there's some fear, there's some falling down on their faces, there's some interesting reactions, but not here. And he has to tell him who he is. I don't know, just pointing it out.
The biggest thing I get from verse 12 is the fact of what John was saying earlier about the tree, and how that is just basically extra information. If you read verse 11, it says he's sitting underneath this tree, hanging out. Then, by the way, now he's down with Gideon, who's down in the field
Right.
working. It's like, why did you tell me he was behind the tree if he had to go down and talk to
Well,
Gideon?
not only do I not see him like responding the way that I think he should, he actually is like, well, if you are, then why is? I mean, his response is kind of interesting as to what's happening here.
Gideon's story is one of doubt. Like the whole casting out your fleece thing is not a good thing. I know it kind of gets presented that way sometimes. But if you read the whole story of Gideon, you're going to get frustrated with this character pretty quickly because he just will not stay faithful.
Yeah.
He does really good, and then he's filled with doubt. And then he does really good, and then he's off in the weeds again. And I think I get frustrated with him because it reminds me a lot of me. Like I know and I love Jesus, and I have a relationship with him, and I am plagued with doubts sometimes.
Let me just another question. I don't think
I was having a moment there, man. I was really trying to emotionally
when he
connect
says
with
the
people.
Lord is with you, it seems like it's like a greeting, not necessarily introducing himself. Like, I am the Lord and I'm with you.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't seem to respond to like who this guy is that's standing with him. He goes on and says, well, if the Lord is with us,
Then
you
why
get it?
has all this happened to us?
But
And-
yes,
yeah.
there is definitely this ongoing sense of doubt. And
So in the Bible, when you see the expression in Hebrew in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord, it's not referring to just a normal angel. This angel does weird things, like accept worship. And the Bible seems to sometimes stop calling him the angel of the Lord and sometimes just call him the Lord. And so this is an expression of God's presence. This is him presenting himself in a way that Gideon could be in the presence of, in the similar way that he did with us with Jesus. He was God in the flesh. This is God making himself present. And would you pick up in verse 13 there? We'll keep going.
Yep, sure can. Here, let me get this pulled back up. I was trying to do some research here because in your notes it says, Gideon said to him, please, my Lord, lowercase Lord, if the Lord, uppercase, is with us, then why has all this happened to us? So I was trying to pull it up on my Bible app to see if there was any significance to that before we were going. And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from the land of Midian. Do not I send
Not the
you?
land of Midian.
The hand of Midian. Do not I send you?
it's different.
Yeah, so the enemy is identified here. And God says, listen, I am sending you to confront the Midianites. This is similar to the Moses thing, except in that story, Moses seeks out God. In this instance, God is seeking out Gideon. And he says, listen, go in this might of yours, which we have no evidence of at all, and save Israel from the hand of Midian. And then he says, do not I send you? Now, this is neat because it reminds me later of the book of Isaiah chapter 6, where the Lord asks, who will go and who will go for me? And Isaiah responds, here am I, send me.
Yeah.
Gideon is like the polar opposite of that. He's like, I don't know. I'm not sure if God really is our guy. I don't know if I know for sure. I'm just going to stay down here in my hole and keep, eking out a living as best I can. And in verse 15, he starts coming up with the excuses. And this is going to define Gideon's character throughout this story. He is a man of many excuses, and men are a gender of many excuses. Mm-hmm. And so he is representative here of a lot of us. But keep going.
And he said to him, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike down the Midianites as one man.
Now, we're going to jump in the story, but some really interesting things are about to take place. Gideon begins to realize that he's not talking to a person. He's not even just talking to an angelic being, but that he is in conversation with the Lord who he was just bad-mouthing. And saying, well, if God really was going to do anything, well, where is he? And you kind of like almost hear like the chuckling of God over the edge of this wine press. And in order to really launch this attack against Midian, it's going to start with a territorial spiritual connection. He doesn't say, go to the nearest Midianite stronghold and burn it down. He says, if we're going to attack Midian, the very first thing we do is we strike a blow against Baal. And so let's jump to verse 25.
That night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and the second bull 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of the stronghold here, with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull and offer it as a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah that you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night.
So I just want you to engage with this story a little bit, knowing the background here, that who Baal of Peor is, that this is an underworld, a chthonic deity, and is filled with fearful elements. And we've talked a little bit about Asherah, the strider, the walker. And what exactly is Gideon being asked to do here?
He's going to war against the gods.
Declare war, yeah.
I mean, this is a legit ask. I mean, especially knowing that these aren't just statues. I mean, they represented something. And he's going to go and tear it down and to make the Asherah into some firewood. It's like,
that's the biggest thing for me, is how bold of an ask it is. It's like,
is.
you could say, well, go into the town square and, declare God is better than these guys. And you could do that in multiple different ways. You could wear a T-shirt, you could say things, you could have a sign, but it's like, no, tear down what they have and then burn it.
But
it's also a big thing.
There's a removal of the confidence and the presence of these gods into the other nations, the nations that are worshiping them, and Israel, and removing them. These gods are nothing.
Yeah, that God is here, so the darkness must flee.
Right.
And it's neat. Did you notice where the altar seems to be? Look at verse 26.
On top of the stronghold?
On top of the stronghold here. So again, this is a high place. They walk into this place, Gideon and 10 other guys, and they pull down the altar of Baal. And there's probably an idol that's there. They've smashed it. They've torn it down. They take axes to Asherah, and they chop her into firewood, and then they burn her. This all would have been seen not as just, we're redecorating, Baal is so out of season, we're really followers of the Lord now, and so we're going to have an altar for him. What must have been going through those guys' mind as Gideon comes and knocks on their door that night and says, follow me. We're going to go up under the cloak of darkness, and we're going to walk up to the high place of Baal, and we're going to war against the god. We're going to tear it down.
Well, there's no way that he, I guess, portrayed it to them in that way, as we are going to war against Baal. Because, I mean, the way I see it is that if you as a person just go to war against a god or a spiritual being, you have no chance. But saying that we, meaning, the Lord is
Lord
going
is
to
with you.
war with
Yeah.
him. Yeah, so there had to have been some way that he's portraying that to these guys as well.
Seeing that the word servants makes me feel like they didn't have a choice. But if it said Gideon grabbed some of his buddies, I guarantee they'd be like, I ain't going, you are crazy. We are not doing that. But, I mean, I feel like servants like they had to.
Well, he seems to be acting out of fear for his family. Mm-hmm. It says he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, and so he did it at night, which to me makes it scarier. If I'm going to go visit a graveyard, I would like to do that in the daytime, please. I would not like to do that at nighttime. Escaping
is a little easier in the darkness, But at the same time, you got to kind of set that pole down really gently. I'm not going to smash it up or anything. I'm going to be really quiet.
Yeah, but to chop down the idol is to legitimately, like, you're at war from this point on.
So he's entering into this holy space of what they considered a holy space to get
unholy
to these.
Space. Yeah.
Well, it was when we saw those temples. I mean, it looks like every single one of them had these kind of spaces, the high places, and those type of things. I mean, they're entering right into it as if it's nothing to take this thing down. I'm not saying it actually is, but to them it was. I mean, he's just walking in there, chopping down the pole, breaking, doing whatever he did to the Baal Peor. But even though I see he's doing it at nighttime, what he's doing is pretty courageous, even though it's happening at night.
I think it's a really courageous thing to do, even though it highlights his fear. These towns, especially places like Shittim or other places, there are people living close by to this. So it's not as though nobody heard this. You can't chop down a tree quietly. You cannot, tear down an altar but be like, quietly, help me move these things. Like this is a demolition job that's going on. And then they take up an offering, and they've taken 2 bulls up there, and they slaughter one of the bulls. There's a very real sense in which this is like hoisting the flag and saying this space is now the Lord's.
So,
now, go ahead.
So, John, I got a question about it, though, because, God asks him to go in and do this, and ultimately he does. But when it mentions that he's scared to do it, and so he does it at night, isn't that him kind of working on his own understanding of what's the best way to get this accomplished?
Yeah, I think so. But God doesn't tell him that he can't do it that way.
And God doesn't seem bothered by the fact that he did it that way.
No.
He's happy because he did it with that. So I guess that
I think the author's going to bring it up because Gideon later is going to be filled with doubt and unsure about things. And the author of Judges is trying to clue you in that this is just who Gideon is. He really struggles with this. And even though this act is incredibly bold and is anyone who is loyal to Baal of Peor would have responded to this angrily, violently. This is a desecration of our people and all of the sacrifices that we've made. And Gideon is a reluctant hero.
And that's just something that I've been really chewing on lately is, if God gives you a task to do something or perform something, how much leeway do we have in the way that we get it done? Is kind of what I'm saying. Is like, when is that like, well, you're not really doing what God asked, you're doing what you want done, or the way that you want it to get done. Is instead of like, yeah, I'm getting it done what God wants, it just maybe looks a little different than what you would expect it to be done.
Martin's looking for an application with this, John. I need you
it's
to
not
tell
my
him.
thing. You do that.
But it's just an interesting question.
It's delayed
though, because
obedience. These are the partial obedience. These are some really, really good questions.
Well, let me turn your attention back to verse 14. This may help a little bit with that. So the angel of the Lord is speaking, and here it doesn't call him the angel of the Lord. Here it calls him the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so this gives you a clue as to who this is. The angel of the Lord is the Lord manifesting himself. It says, the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours and save Israel from Midian. Did not I send you? I think that the idea that God would then direct every step and explain like a Lego set, now you take this one and you put it here and you move it this one and you put it there, really removes the creative factor. Like, if that's the case, then why does God call Gideon? It's as though God has created this man for this purpose and that his struggle is going to really matter here. And there is an element where God gives freedom of operation to his people. And so, Gideon I don't think he's being disobedient, but I think he is struggling with a very real emotion that anyone would face if being asked to do something scary like that. And not just the supernatural element of it, but he's in the middle of a town of people who worship Baal of Peor. That's who this is. And only an idiot would not recognize that this is going to go badly
during the day. Yeah.
And so I don't want to diminish the application part here, but I do want to establish firmly the humanity of the character. And when you're reading the Bible, it will serve you well to read it like it really happened.
Well, and like you mentioned, though, how you get frustrated with Gideon because of some of the stuff that he does. I think this is the first one that stood out to me. It's like, man, like God literally looked you in the eye and told you what to do, and you still couldn't do it. You had to do it at night. But then it's like, well, let's think about it. What would you have done? Like you're saying, they could have had guards through the day that are standing by these statues. And he's like, well, this is kind of a physical impossibility for me to do this. I'll do it at night. It's a creative way to help get God, well, not help God, but to do what God has asked you to do.
Yeah, and I don't see that as bad. I just see that as that's what happened. And sometimes God asks us to do things, and he doesn't give us very detailed directions. Mm-hmm. It's a general...
And that's on purpose, I would...
Yeah. Let's keep going. This is Judges 6, verse 28 through 32.
When the men of the town rose early in the morning, behold, The altar of Baal was broken down, and the Asheroth beside it was cut down, and the second bowl was offered on the altar that had been built. And they said to one another, Who has done this thing? And after they had searched and inquired, they said, Gideon the son of Joash has done these things.
How do they know that?
Dang it. God, I did it at night. I had my servants with me, so no one would tattle, and they know.
Forensic science.
Obviously. Yeah, so these guys, why didn't they come out at night to defend Baal?
I don't know.
They were probably scared of
I think it tells you a lot. Like, Gideon's not the only nervous guy in this village.
Right. It's true.
Like, they've been abused by the Midianites, people that they know have been killed by the Midianites, and now there's something creepy going on up at the temple, and they're just not, they're like, it's nighttime, I'm staying in here, but in the morning, dang it, I'm going to figure out what's going on.
Which is a great idea, because earlier we talked about them sacrificing to Baal to help him get from the underworld back up.
Mm-hmm.
But now all of a sudden they hear this attack on Baal, and they're like, he can take care of it. I'm sleeping in.
This is what the Bible means when it says, who are your gods? Like, they're nothing. God doesn't need your help. If God wanted to destroy a Baal idol, he would have no problem doing it. So why does he allow Gideon to be part of this attack?
I think that God's plan is to include humanity in everything that he's doing. I mean, there are times when he does things by himself, but most of the time things that he wants done, he includes individuals to do it. Same thing with the church age today. I mean, to include us in this process of rescuing or sharing the gospel and seeing people go from death to life. I mean, he has included us. I mean, he's like, he does it all through Scripture. Like, God, why couldn't you have taken them out? Why couldn't you just taken out the army? Why do you have them go to battle? Like, what's the point here? Why can't he just take out all of Midian? Hailstorm from heaven, let's get her done and be over with. But why all this stuff? I think it's because he's building faith, and there's a relationship element here that God's continuing to try to build within his people.
That's what I'm trying to point us towards, is that there is an element in which mankind is made by God to be involved in these things. Yeah. We don't have to do them, we get to do them. This is part of what God has made us for. And so I'm not going to condemn him for going at night. I'm going to say, well, you may have done that out of fear, but it's actually not a bad plan. Mm-hmm. This isn't bad. But if you were hoping it would stay secret, that's just dumb. This is a small town, man. Word's going to get around. People were looking out their windows. Kind of makes you wonder if some of the servants were like, honey, you're not going to believe what I did last night.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Gideon made us do. Yeah, you imagine.
That's probably who told, when they're asking who did this. The servants were like,
yeah. And did you notice how they describe him? Gideon, the son of Joash, has done. And then, Joseph is probably like, whoa. Gideon did that. There's no reason to drag me into this story at all.
There's no way Gideon did that. He's hiding away all the time down in that wine press. He doesn't want to be seen by the enemy at all, let alone be up there. Yeah, this is great. Let's call his dad into it.
But his dad is really the saving character here, because I don't know where Gideon's at. He seems to be hiding in his father's house. And the people are outside, and they say, bring out your son that he may die, for he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down Asherah beside it. And you get this idea of like, where are you, Gideon? Like, wouldn't it have been like good for them to wake up that morning and there you are up on the steps of the stronghold, and you're like preaching this awesome sermon.
And he's like, over your shoulder.
Look, I was up late, Dad. I'm just going to go crash on the couch for a while. And there's this whole episode that's about to take place. But Joash said to all who stood against him, and I love that line. I've got it highlighted in my Bible. And the question is beautiful in regards to our concept of territorial spirits. Go ahead and take this away.
But Joash said to all who stood against him, will you contend for Baal, or will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is God, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down. Therefore, on that day, Gideon was called Jerubbaal.
Yeah, Jerubbaal.
That is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he broke down his altar.
Now, this is neat. So his dad says, does Baal need you to save him? Like, if you look at, like, it's a good thing you're here, because
Does your awesome, all-powerful God need you to save him from my son?
Yeah, from the kid who can't even come out here and talk to you guys.
Here they're all really angry. It's like, that's a good point. It's really bad right now.
So, but notice what Joash does. He's standing alone against these people, and he says, whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. Like, that's a threat. He's saying, listen, if you're going to stand with Baal, I will come down off these stairs, and you will not see the sunrise tomorrow. Because there's this real sense in which what Gideon did touched a nerve.
Sounds like he's the one that should have went and did it, not Gideon.
Well, I have a soft
bold,
spot
you know?
for Joash here. He says, if he is a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down. Therefore, on that day, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which is to say, let Baal stick up for himself. That's an awesome name. Now, last week or 2 weeks ago, we talked about how the children of Israel were taken out of Jerusalem and they were renamed and given names associated with worshiping the gods. Here's a name that seems to be making fun
Taunting
of one of the gods. And then in the middle there we had Elijah, and Elijah is a mocker. Like he is sarcastic and a complete jerk to the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And so you see that described here again, that, you know, if Baal is what he says he is, where is he?
This makes me think about the times that Israel's temple is torn down. Like what this symbolizes here. In the same way God didn't do anything to them. But what this means here. You get when you catch them when I'm throwing here? Like here they are tearing down the Baal and tearing on the Ashtaroth, and he's basically saying, let them contend for themselves. But there's stories in the Bible where these foreign nations come in, God allows them to, and it looks like they're doing the same thing to God's temple or to his altars or to his stuff, and God doesn't do anything to them.
So next week, we will cover a story exactly about that.
Yes.
Where God will defend himself.
I asked this on purpose.
Against the other nations and the gods that have them in bondage. And so as we end this episode, however you feel about Gideon, I think that he's a very human character. But what I really love about Gideon here and his relationship with his father here especially is this question. He doesn't say that, you know, Baal is imaginary. And instead, he questions his right to be a god. He says, this is not the person that we should be worshiping. This is an evil. This is a mocker. This is an imposter who has set himself up. If my son can tear down his altars, then he is not the God that is saving the people or bringing us our hope. But there is a God that is able to bring hope, that is able to bring resurrection from the grave, that is able to bring hope and love and joy and peace, that is able to bring healing into the world. And that's Jesus Christ. That's God the Father. That's the Holy Spirit. That's the Trinity, these three and yet one, that the Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords. He is mighty and awesome.